Look at her shoes, Your Honor. They're splitting at the seams. She isn't here for closure. She's here for a handout." The courtroom erupted in low, cruel laughter. Julian Vance, the golden son of the Vance dynasty, leaned back in his Italian leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Beside him, his mother Lydia adjusted her diamond brooch, refusing to even look at the woman standing alone on the other side of the aisle. Alice stood silent, her coat damp from the rain, gripping the edge of the defendant's table until her knuckles turned white. They thought they had won. They thought this was the end of a pathetic attempt by an estranged daughter to grab a few pennies. But they didn't know who was walking through the doors in exactly 30 seconds. They didn't know that the folder sitting on the judge's bench didn't just contain a will, it contained a death sentence for their entire lifestyle. Stay tuned. You are about to witness the most brutal, satisfying courtroom takedown in history. The surrogate's court in Lower Manhattan is designed to intimidate. The ceilings are too high, the marble too cold, and the air always smells of old paper and expensive anxiety. On this particular Tuesday in November, courtroom 302 was packed. It wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a spectator sport. The estate of Arthur Vance was at stake. We are talking about the man who built Vance Holloway Global, a conglomerate that had its tentacles in everything, from North Sea oil drilling to Silicon Valley microchips. When Arthur died of a sudden heart attack 3 weeks ago, the financial world held its breath. The valuation of his private assets wasn't just in the billions. Once you accounted for the offshore holdings, the real estate portfolio managed by Blackstone, and the intellectual property rights, analysts whispered the word trillion with a shudder, and fighting for it were the rightful heirs. Julian Vance, 26 years old, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most cars, and his mother, Lydia Vance, Arthur's second wife, a woman whose face was as tight and unmoving as the Hermes bag sitting at her feet. Opposite them stood Alice Vance, 32. She wore a charcoal grey coat she'd bought at a Goodwill in Brooklyn 3 years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, but stray strands had escaped, frizzed by the torrential rain outside. She had no entourage, no team of paralegals from Skadden Arps whispering in her ear. Just her. "Mr. Sterling, you may continue," Judge Harrison Thorne said, peering over his spectacles. He looked bored. To him, this was an open and shut case. Marcus Sterling, the lead litigator for the Vance estate, a man known in legal circles as the Shark of Wall Street, stood up. He didn't just walk, he prowled. He adjusted his cufflinks, flashing a glimpse of a Patek Philippe watch, and turned his back to the judge to face the gallery, then slowly pivoted to Alice. "We are wasting the court's time," Sterling began, his voice a smooth baritone that carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "The plaintiff, Miss Alice Vance, if she can even legally claim that name, has been estranged from my late client, Arthur Vance, for 12 years. 12 years, Your Honor. She didn't visit him when he had his bypass surgery in 2018. She didn't attend the gala for the Vance Foundation in 2020. She wasn't there when he took his last breath at Mount Sinai Hospital." Sterling walked closer to Alice's table, invading her personal space. He could smell the damp wool of her coat. He wrinkled his nose theatrically. "And now?" Sterling gestured to her with an open palm, as if presenting a piece of rotting fruit. "Now that the accounts are being settled, she appears. Look at her. She claims she wants a memento, a sentimental item. But we know the truth. This is a woman who works double shifts at a diner in Queens. She can barely pay her rent. This isn't about love, Your Honor. It's about poverty. She is desperate, and desperation makes people greedy. Julian snickered audibly. "She's pathetic," he whispered to Lydia, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Dad would be embarrassed she's even in the room." Lydia didn't smile. She just stared straight ahead, her eyes cold. "She was always a mistake," Lydia murmured. "Arthur should have cut her off legally when she was 18. I told him to." Sterling turned back to the judge. "We ask for a summary dismissal of her claim to contest the will. The will dated August 14th, 2021, is clear. Everything, the stocks, the liquidity, the properties in the Hamptons, Monaco, and Aspen, goes to his wife, Lydia, and his son, Julian. Alice Vance gets nothing, as per Arthur's wishes." Judge Thorne looked at Alice. "Miss Vance? Do you have counsel, or are you still representing yourself?" Alice stood up. Her legs felt heavy, but her voice was steady. "I am representing myself, Your Honor. And do you have a response to Mr. Sterling's statement?" "I do," Alice said. "I am not here for money. I am here because my father called me." "Objection!" Sterling barked. "Hearsay. The deceased cannot testify." "Sustained," the judge sighed. "Miss Vance, unless you have proof of a newer will or a legal document contradicting the 2021 filing, you are out of order." "I don't have the will," Alice said quietly. Julian laughed again, throwing his head back. "Then sit down and go back to serving coffee, Alice." "Order!" Judge Thorne banged his gavel. "Mr. Vance, control yourself." "I apologize, Your Honor," Julian said, though his grin remained. It's insulting to my father's memory to have her here, begging like a street urchin." Alice looked at Julian. For the first time, a spark of something dangerous lit up her eyes. It wasn't sadness, it was pity. "I don't have the will," Alice repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Because he has it." She pointed to the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. The room went silent. Everyone turned. Nothing happened. Sterling chuckled. "Who? The ghost of Christmas past?" "No," Alice said, checking her cheap plastic wristwatch. "Mr. Alistair Cromwell." At the mention of that name, the blood drained from Marcus Sterling's face. He froze. Even Lydia Vance shifted in her seat, her grip tightening on her bag. Alistair Cromwell. The name was a myth in legal circles. He was the managing partner of Cromwell, Graves and Roth, a firm so exclusive they didn't have a website. They didn't take cases. They managed empires. They represented the British royal family's private investments, the Vatican's real estate trust, and exactly 3 tech billionaires. "Mr. Cromwell?" Judge Thorne asked, his eyebrows shooting up. "Ms. Vance, Alistair Cromwell hasn't been seen in a New York courtroom since the Enron trials. I highly doubt." The heavy oak doors groaned open. And there he was. To understand why the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees when Alistair Cromwell walked in, you have to understand the history of the Vance family, the history that Julian and Lydia had spent a decade trying to erase. 12 years ago, Alice wasn't the poor relation. She was the heir apparent. Alice was the daughter of Arthur's first wife, Catherine, a brilliant mathematician who had actually written the foundational code for Arthur's first software breakthrough. When Catherine died in a car accident, Arthur was shattered. Alice was his shadow. She sat in boardrooms at age 10, coloring in coloring books, while her father negotiated mergers. By 16, she was correcting his spreadsheets. Then came Lydia. Lydia was Arthur's personal assistant. Beautiful, ambitious, and ruthless. She saw a grieving man, and she played her part perfectly. She isolated Arthur. She whispered poison in his ear about Alice, how Alice was ungrateful, how she was plotting against him, how she was mentally unstable like her mother. When Alice turned 20, the breaking point came. Lydia staged a theft. A set of diamond earrings went missing. They were found in Alice's college dorm room, planted by the housekeeper on Lydia's payroll. Arthur, blinded by his new wife and his own failing health, exploded. He accused Alice of stealing from the family. He called her a disappointment. Alice didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply packed a bag. She told her father, "If you believe her over me, after 20 years, then you don't have a daughter." She walked out. She changed her number. She moved to a different borough. She refused to use the Vance name, going by her middle name, Rose, on her lease. She worked as a barista, then a library clerk. She lived in a walk-up apartment with radiator pipes that clanked all night. For 12 years, she was a ghost. Julian, who was only 14 when she left, absorbed his mother's narrative. To him, Alice was the villain, the jealous older sister who couldn't handle his mother's success. He grew up surrounded by yes-men, driving cars he didn't earn, spending money he didn't make. He viewed Alice's poverty as a moral failing. If she was smart, she would be rich. She wasn't rich, therefore she was stupid. But Julian missed one detail. Arthur Vance was a paranoid man. He was a man who built his empire on redundancies and fail-safes. And despite Lydia's brainwashing, deep down, in the reptilian part of his brain, Arthur knew something was wrong. 6 months ago, Arthur had reached out. Not to Alice directly. Lydia intercepted all his calls and emails. He had reached out to the one man Lydia couldn't intimidate, Alistair Cromwell. Back in the courtroom, Cromwell walked down the aisle. He was a man of 70, leaning on a cane with a handle carved from ivory. He wore a 3-piece tweed suit that looked like it belonged in 1950s Oxford. He moved slowly, but with the gravitational pull of a planet. 2 junior associates followed him, carrying 3 large metal briefcases handcuffed to their wrists. "My apologies for the theatrics, Judge Thorne," Cromwell said. His voice was like grinding stones, rough, deep, and ancient. Traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge is quite dreadful. Sterling, the opposing lawyer, tried to regain control. "Mr. Cromwell, this is a surprise, but I fail to see what standing you have here. I am the executor of the Vance estate." Cromwell stopped. He looked at Sterling with mild amusement, the way a human looks at a hamster spinning in a wheel. "You are the executor of the public estate, Mr. Sterling," Cromwell corrected. "The estate governed by the will filed in New York County, the assets held within the United States jurisdiction." Cromwell signaled to his associates. They placed the metal cases on the table next to Alice. "However," Cromwell continued, "Arthur Vance was a citizen of the world, and in 2019 he realized that his domestic affairs were compromised." Cromwell glanced briefly at Lydia. She went pale. "Therefore," Cromwell said, tapping his cane on the floor, he initiated the Zurich Protocol. A gasp went through the gallery. The financial reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their phones. "The Zurich Protocol?" Judge Thorne asked, leaning forward. "A shadow trust, Your Honor," Cromwell explained, "incorporated in the canton of Zurich, with subsidiaries in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. Arthur Vance moved the majority of his voting shares, his intellectual property rights, and his liquid capital into this trust 3 years ago." "That's a lie!" Julian shouted, standing up. "My father wouldn't hide money from us. I saw the bank statements." "You saw what he wanted you to see, boy," Cromwell snapped. The playfulness was gone. Arthur knew he was surrounded by vultures, so he hid the meat. "And who?" Sterling asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Is the beneficiary of this Zurich Protocol?" Cromwell smiled. He turned to Alice. Alice didn't look at the cases. She looked at her stepmother. Lydia was gripping the table so hard her acrylic nails were threatening to snap. "The trust is not set up with a beneficiary in the traditional sense," Cromwell said. "It is a holding company. Vance Holloway Global is now owned 90% by this trust, and the trust is controlled by a single trustee with absolute executive power." "Who is the trustee?" the judge demanded. Cromwell reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He handed it to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge. "The trustee," Cromwell said, his eyes locking onto Julian, "was appointed based on a test of character." Arthur watched from afar. He wanted to know who could survive without his money, who could build a life with integrity rather than entitlement. Judge Thorne opened the envelope. He read the name. He looked up, his eyes wide. He looked at Alice. "The trustee," the judge read aloud, "is Alice Catherine Vance." Silence. Absolute silence. Then Julian laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "This is a joke. She's a waitress. She serves pancakes. You're telling me she owns the company? She doesn't even know how to run a lemonade stand." Alice finally spoke. She walked around the table, her heels clicking on the floor. She stopped directly in front of Julian. She was shorter than him, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over the entire room. "You're right, Julian," she said softly. "I do serve pancakes. And do you know what I learned serving pancakes?" She leaned in close. "I learned that if you treat the people who handle your food like garbage, eventually you're going to eat poison." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to petition the court to freeze all assets currently held by Julian and Lydia Vance, pending a forensic audit of the estate's expenditures over the last 5 years. I believe we will find that they have been embezzling from the company accounts long before my father died." "You can't do that!" Lydia shrieked, finally losing her composure. She stood up, knocking her Hermes bag over. "Arthur would never allow this. I am his wife." "You were his wife," Alice corrected. "I am his blood, and I am his boss." Alice turned to Cromwell. "Mr. Cromwell, please open case number 1. Cromwell nodded to his associate. The associate unlocked the first briefcase. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't deeds. It was a stack of photographs. "Part of the Zurich Protocol," Cromwell narrated, "involved a private investigation team, Kroll International. They have been documenting the activities of Mrs. Lydia Vance and Mr. Julian Vance for 24 months. Cromwell pulled out a large photo and held it up for the court. "This is you, Julian," Cromwell said. "In Monte Carlo. Last year. With a gentleman named Sergei Volkov, a known money launderer." Julian's face turned the color of ash. "And this," Cromwell pulled out another photo, "is Mrs. Vance, meeting with a notary in New Jersey, forging Arthur's signature on a transfer of deed for the Hamptons estate." "That's not true," Lydia screamed. "We have the notary in custody," Cromwell said calmly. "He is very eager to cut a deal." The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. The bailiff was calling for order. But Alice just stood there, watching her family crumble. Sterling, the shark, saw the blood in the water. He started packing his briefcase. "Your Honor, I need to request a recess to consult with my clients regarding these new allegations. I was not made aware of any—" "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Thorne boomed. "Nobody is leaving this room." Alice looked at Julian's shoes. They were polished, Italian leather. "Nice shoes, Julian," she said. "I hope they're comfortable, because it's a long walk to the unemployment line." But this was only the beginning. The documents in case number 1 were just the appetizer. The real twist, the one that would shake the foundations of New York society, was sitting in case number 2, and Alice hadn't even looked at it yet. The silence in courtroom 302 was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum. The air had been sucked out by the revelation of the Zurich Protocol. But Alistair Cromwell wasn't finished. He tapped the second metal briefcase with the tip of his cane. "Mr. Sterling," Cromwell rumbled, "you raised a point earlier about sentimental value. You mocked Ms. Vance for wanting a memento. You implied that the only currency that matters is the one printed by the Federal Reserve." Cromwell nodded to his associate. The second case clicked open. It didn't contain documents. It contained a single vintage reel-to-reel tape recorder and a stack of digital hard drives. "Arthur Vance was a man of technology," Cromwell said, "but he was also a man of nostalgia, and he was a man who knew he was being watched in his own home by his own wife." Lydia's face was a mask of terror. She knew Arthur spent hours in his study, but she thought he was just drinking scotch and staring at the wall. "These drives," Cromwell continued, "contain audio recordings of every conversation held in the Vance Penthouse Library for the last 5 years. Arthur bugged his own house, Your Honor." "This is inadmissible," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "New York is a wiretap state. You cannot—" "Arthur Vance consented to the recording on his own property," Cromwell countered smoothly. "And under the terms of the Zurich Trust, these recordings are property of the trustee, Ms. Alice Vance." Alice stepped forward. "Play it," she said. Cromwell's associate pressed a button on a laptop connected to the courtroom speaker system. The audio was grainy at first, then crystal clear. It was Lydia's voice. "He's taking too long to die, Julian. The potassium levels need to be higher. Dr. Evans said if we increase the dosage in his nightcap, it will look like cardiac arrest within a month." The gallery gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a scream. Then Julian's voice. "I don't care about the dosage, Mum. I just want the signature on the power of attorney. Once I have that, I can liquidate the tech division before the board even knows he's gone." Then a third voice, a man's voice. Marcus Sterling. "Make sure the will is airtight, Lydia. If the daughter, the waitress, comes sniffing around, we need to bury her. I'll draft a clause that disinherits her if she contests. We'll leave her with nothing but legal fees." Marcus Sterling, the shark of Wall Street, dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked at the judge, then at the door, calculating the distance to freedom. Judge Thorne's face was a shade of purple that suggested an imminent explosion. He looked at the court reporter. "Are you getting this?" "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered, typing furiously. "This is a deep fake," Julian yelled, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at the laptop. "That's AI. You can do that with computers now. My father was senile. He didn't record anything." Alice walked over to the table where the evidence lay. She picked up a small, leather-bound book from the case that Cromwell hadn't mentioned yet. "He wasn't senile, Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "He was heartbroken." She opened the book. It was Arthur's handwriting, shaky but legible. "August 14th, 2021, Alice read aloud. "I know what they are doing. I taste the metal in the water they bring me. I hear them whispering in the hall. My heart hurts, not from the poison but from the truth. I failed Alice. I let the wolves in. Now I have to play the fool to keep them from hunting her too. If I die, they stop looking for her. If I fight, they will go after her to get to me. So I will drink their water. And I will wait. Alistair knows what to do." Alice closed the book. A tear finally escaped, tracking through the light makeup she wore. She looked at Lydia. "He died to protect me from you," Alice whispered. "Lydia Vance The woman who had ruled New York society for a decade slumped in her chair. The facade didn't just crack, it shattered. She covered her face with her hands. "Bailiff!" Judge Thorne roared. "Seal the doors. Nobody leaves this courtroom. Mr. Sterling, you are in contempt. And Mrs. Vance, I suggest you don't make any travel plans." But Julian wasn't done. The arrogance that had been bred into him for 20 years couldn't be extinguished by mere evidence. He looked at Alice with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think this matters?" Julian spat. "You think you can run Vance Global? You serve coffee. The shareholders will eat you alive. The stock will tank the moment they find out a waitress is in charge. You'll destroy everything he built in a week." Alice looked at him. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked like a CEO. "The stock might drop, Julian," she said coolly. "But unlike you, I know the value of $1. And I know how to work. I'm not going to run the company from a yacht in the Mediterranean. I'm going to run it from the ground up." She turned to Cromwell. "What's in the third case?" Cromwell smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "The third case, Miss Vance, contains the cleanup." The chaos in the courtroom was only the beginning. As the bailiffs moved to detain Lydia and Marcus Sterling for questioning regarding the suspicious circumstances of Arthur's death, the media storm outside began to swirl. But money has a way of fighting back. While Lydia was being read her rights, Julian had slipped his phone out. He sent a single text message. Code red. Execute Omega. Julian was escorted out by police, but he wasn't arrested yet, only detained for questioning. He knew the system. He knew that without a body autopsy confirming poison, the tape was just audio. It could be challenged. It could be delayed. By the time Alice stepped out of the courthouse, flanked by Cromwell's large security team, the narrative was already shifting. A news van from CNBC was parked at the curb. A reporter thrust a microphone in Alice's face. "Ms. Vance! Ms. Vance! Is it true that you have a history of mental instability? Sources from the Vance Board of Directors are saying this secret trust is a fabrication of a senile man manipulated by an estranged daughter." Alice stopped. "Who told you that?" "The board issued a statement 5 minutes ago," the reporter said, checking her phone. "They are enacting a poison pill defense. They refuse to recognize the Zurich authority. They claim Arthur Vance was clinically diagnosed with dementia in 2020 and lacked the capacity to create the trust." Alice looked at Cromwell. "They're trying to lock me out." "Standard procedure," Cromwell said, unfazed. "They know if you get into the building you'll see the books. They are burning documents as we speak." "Then we need to get there," Alice said. "Now." "It's 5 p.m., Cromwell said. "The building is on lockdown. Security is loyal to Julian's payroll." Alice tightened her goodwill coat. "My father built that building. I remember the blueprints. I remember the service tunnels. I used to hide in them when I was a kid playing hide-and-seek." She looked at the line of black SUVs Cromwell had waiting. "Take me to Fifth Avenue," she ordered, "and get me a laptop." Vance Tower is a 90-story monolith of glass and steel in Midtown. It is a fortress. The lobby is guarded by private security contractors who look more like mercenaries than rent-a-cops. When Alice's convoy pulled up, the rotating doors were locked. A line of security guards stood with arms crossed behind the glass. Julian had been released on his own recognizance. Wealth has its privileges, and had beaten them there. He was inside, up in the penthouse office, shredding. Alice stepped out of the car. The rain was still pouring. She walked up to the glass doors. The head of security, a man named Griggs, shook his head and pointed to a sign. "Building closed for emergency maintenance." Alice pulled out her phone. She didn't call the police. She called the one group of people Julian and Lydia had ignored for 20 years, the workers. During her time in exile, Alice hadn't just been a waitress. She had volunteered at the Service Employees International Union. She knew the janitors. She knew the cafeteria staff. She knew the people who actually made the building run. She dialed a number. "Maria. It's Alice. Rose. Yes, I'm outside. They locked the doors. Yes, I know. Can you get to the loading dock override?" Inside the lobby, the lights suddenly flickered. The electronic locks on the side service entrance, the one used for garbage removal, clicked open. Griggs spun around, talking into his earpiece. "What's going on? Who opened the dock?" Alice Cromwell and 4 of Cromwell's associates slipped through the side door before the guards could react. They were in the freight elevator before Griggs even knew they were inside. "To the 90th floor," Alice said. "They'll cut the power to the elevators," Cromwell warned. "Let them," Alice said. "We're not going to the 90th. We're going to the 88th, the server room." The 88th floor was freezing. It was kept at a constant 60 degrees to cool the massive banks of servers that held the digital brain of Vance Global. Alice stepped out of the freight elevator. She didn't look like a scared daughter anymore. She looked like Catherine Vance, her mother, the mathematician. "Julian thinks power is in the corner office," Alice said, walking down the rows of blinking blue lights. "He thinks power is the mahogany desk, but this—" She ran her hand over a server rack. "This is the heartbeat." "What are you going to do?" Cromwell asked. "Arthur taught me how to code before I could ride a bike," Alice said. "He taught me that every system has a back door. He called it the Daddy's Girl protocol. He joked that if he ever got locked out, I could let him back in." She found the main terminal. She sat down on the cold floor, pulling the laptop Cromwell had given her onto her lap. She connected a hardwire cable to the server. "They're wiping the drives upstairs," Cromwell said, checking his phone. "Our intel says Julian has the IT director doing a secure format of the accounting sectors." "He can try," Alice typed furiously. Her fingers flew across the keys, the code reflected in her eyes. "Access denied. Access denied. Come on, Dad," she whispered. "Let me in." She typed in a password, not a complex string of numbers, but a date. 11 Toverhofer to 1998, the day her mother died. Access granted. "I'm in," Alice said. "I can see them deleting files. They're trying to erase the bribe payments to the FDA commissioner. Can you stop it?" "Better," Alice smiled. "I can mirror it. I'm redirecting the data stream. Instead of the trash bin, every deleted file is being uploaded to a secure cloud server." Suddenly, the red emergency lights began to flash. The fire alarm blared. "They know we're here," Cromwell said. "They triggered the halon gas warning. They're going to dump fire suppression gas in here. It sucks the oxygen out of the room." "I need 2 minutes," Alice shouted over the siren. "We have 30 seconds before the gas hits," Cromwell's bodyguard yelled. "We have to move. Not until the upload is done." Alice didn't flinch. Upstairs, on the 90th floor, Julian was screaming at the IT director. "Why isn't it gone? Why is the progress bar stuck?" "Someone is mirroring the drive, sir. They've hijacked the system." "Cut the line! Cut the hard line!" Julian screamed. Back in the server room, the hissing sound of gas injection began. "Alice!" Cromwell grabbed her shoulder. "Done!" Alice slapped the enter key. "Upload complete. And I just locked them out of the elevators. Julian is trapped on the 90th floor." Alice stood up, grabbing the laptop. They ran for the stairwell just as the room filled with the white, suffocating fog of the suppression system. They burst into the stairwell, gasping for air. "Now," Alice said, adjusting her coat. "Now we go upstairs. I want to see his face when he realizes he's fired." They climbed 2 flights of stairs. Cromwell, despite his age, kept up, fueled by the adrenaline of the hunt. They reached the 90th floor. The double-glass doors to the executive suite were locked. Inside, the board of directors, 6 old white men in expensive suits, were pacing nervously. Julian was throwing a vase against the wall. Alice didn't knock. "Open it," she told Cromwell's security. The guard used a battering-ram tool. With one swing, the lock shattered. The doors swung open. Alice Vance walked into the office she hadn't seen since she was a child. The view of Manhattan was breathtaking. The smell of fear was pungent. Julian spun around. He looked disheveled, sweaty, and manic. "Get out!" he screamed. "Security! Arrest her! She's trespassing!" "Sit down, Julian," Alice said. Her voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "You don't tell me what to do. I am the CEO." "No," Alice said. She projected the laptop screen onto the massive wall-mounted monitor in the conference room. It showed the bank transfers, the bribes, the offshore accounts in Julian's name, and the timestamp of the files he had just tried to delete. "You are a criminal," Alice said, "and as the sole trustee of the controlling shares of Vance Global, I am hereby removing you from your position, effective immediately." She turned to the board of directors. "And you, gentlemen, you have a choice. You can resign right now, with your pensions intact. Or you can stay, and I will hand these files over to the FBI. You will go to federal prison for aiding and abetting corporate fraud." The chairman of the board looked at Julian. Then he looked at the screen. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the door. "I resign," he muttered. "Me too," another said. One by one they filed out, leaving Julian alone. Julian backed up against the massive window. You can't do this. We're family." Alice laughed. It was a short, dry sound. "Family? You mocked me for being poor, Julian. You laughed at my shoes. You watched me struggle for 12 years, and you enjoyed it. You aren't family. You're a bad investment. And I'm liquidating." The elevator dinged. It wasn't security. It was the FBI. Cromwell had made a call while they were in the stairwell. "Julian Vance?" the lead agent asked. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud and conspiracy to commit murder." Julian looked at Alice one last time as they cuffed him. "This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have money." Alice walked over to the desk, her father's desk. She sat down in the big leather chair. It felt huge, but it felt right. "You have nothing, Julian," she said. "The trust froze your personal accounts 5 minutes ago. You can't even afford a public defender." She swiveled the chair to look out at the city lights. "Get him out of my office." The arrest of Julian Vance was the headline on every news ticker from Tokyo to Toronto. The Prince of Wall Street being walked out of his own tower in handcuffs was an image that would define the decade. But for Alice, the battle wasn't just about removing the rot. It was about scrubbing the stain. 3 months had passed since the showdown in the penthouse. Alice sat in the office that used to terrify her. She had remodeled. The dark mahogany and intimidating leather were gone. The walls were now a soft cream, the furniture modern and functional. The door was always open. But there was one piece of business left, the clean-up that Cromwell had mentioned in the 3rd briefcase. It wasn't just about firing the board. It was about finding the victims. Alice called a town hall meeting, not for the executives but for the company. Everyone from the mailroom clerks to the mid-level managers gathered in the atrium. Alice stood on a small stage. She wasn't wearing goodwill anymore, but she wasn't wearing Brioni either. She wore a simple, elegant blazer and jeans. "For 10 years," Alice spoke into the microphone, "this company has been run on fear. You were told to cut corners. You were told to ignore safety regulations. You were told that profit matters more than people." She motioned to the screen behind her. A list of names appeared. "These are the people we hurt," she said. The families in the Niger Delta whose water we polluted. The small business owners in Ohio we bankrupted with predatory lawsuits. The employees we fired for trying to unionize. A hush fell over the crowd. CEOs didn't talk about this. CEOs talked about Q4 projections. "We are not just going to apologize," Alice said. "We are going to pay." She announced the Vance Restitution Fund. $2 billion of the company's liquid reserves, money that Julian had earmarked for a new private jet fleet and a super yacht, was being redirected to settle lawsuits, clean up environmental spills, and rehire wrongfully terminated staff. The stock price, which had initially plummeted after Julian's arrest, did something unexpected. It stabilized. Then it started to climb. Why? Because the market realized something. Julian was a gambler, Alice was a builder, and for the first time in a decade, Vance Global wasn't a criminal enterprise. It was a business. But Alice's personal cleanup was harder. She went to the prison to see him. Lydia was in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial for attempted murder. She refused to see Alice. But Julian accepted the visit. He looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a twitchy, desperate energy. "You look good," Julian sneered as she sat down on the other side of the glass. "Enjoying my money?" "It was never your money, Julian," Alice said softly. "I need a lawyer, Alice, a real one. The public defender is an idiot. If you pay for a good defense, I can beat this. I can—" "No," Alice interrupted. "What do you mean, no? We're family." "You keep using that word," Alice said, "but you don't know what it means. I'm not here to bail you out. I'm here to give you something." She slid a photo through the slot. It was an old Polaroid. It showed a 10-year-old Alice holding a baby. "Julian." "I used to rock you to sleep," Alice said, her voice trembling slightly. "When Mum died, and Dad was working, I was the one who fed you. I was the one who taught you how to tie your shoes." Julian stared at the photo. For a second, the mask slipped. He looked like a lost little boy. "I loved you, Julian," she said, "and I would have shared everything with you. If you had just been kind, if you had just called me once in 12 years. "I was scared," Julian whispered. "Mum told me. She told me you hated us." "And you believed her," Alice said. She stood up. "I deposited $5,000 into your commissary account. It's enough for toothpaste and phone calls. It's more than you left me when I was on the street." "Alice, wait!" Julian slammed his hand on the glass. "Don't leave me here." "I'm not leaving you, Julian," Alice said, turning away. "I'm letting you go. There's a difference." She walked out. She didn't look back. The war was over. The skyscrapers of Manhattan, the screaming headlines, the federal indictments. It all felt 1,000,000 miles away. Alice found herself where she always went when the world got too loud. Shelley's Diner in Queens. It was a Tuesday evening, raining just as hard as it had been on the day of the trial. The neon open sign buzzed with that familiar, erratic flicker she had stared at for 3 years while wiping down counters. But tonight, she wasn't wearing the stained apron. She was wearing a cashmere coat, and she was sitting in the customer's booth, the one with the duct tape on the red vinyl seat. Sal, the owner, a man with forearms like tree trunks and a heart of gold, walked over. He didn't bring a menu. He just set down a mug of black coffee and a slice of cherry pie, heated up, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream on the side. "On the house," Sal grunted. He wiped his hands on a rag, looking at her with a mixture of pride and hesitation. "Saw the news, Alice. Or, I guess it's Miss Vance now. They're calling you the Iron Lady of Fifth Avenue." Alice smiled, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. It's still just Alice, Sal. And honestly, I think I was tougher when I was working the night shift here than I am in that boardroom. Sal chuckled. You were always too smart for this place, kid. But you were a damn good worker. You never complained. Not once, even when your shoes were falling apart. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. You know, that guy, your brother, he came in here once, looking for you, about 2 years ago. Alice froze. Julian was here. Yeah. He pulled up in a Porsche, didn't come inside, just cracked the window and asked one of the bus boys if the Vance girl was working. When the kid said yes, your brother just laughed and drove off. He didn't want to see you. He just wanted to know you were still serving food. Sal shook his head. I almost threw a spatula at his car. I'm glad you got him, Alice. I'm glad you got him good. The bell above the door jingled, cutting through the smell of grease and coffee. Alistair Cromwell stepped in. The contrast was jarring. A man in a 3-piece Savile Row suit, standing on the checkered linoleum floor of a Queen's diner. He shook his umbrella off with precise movements and hung his coat by the door before approaching Alice's booth. A culinary establishment of high repute, I assume? Cromwell asked, eyeing the pie. Sit down, Alistair, Alice said. Try the crust. It'll change your life. Cromwell sat. He looked tired. The legal battle to secure the transition of power had been grueling, even for a legend like him. But there was a softness in his eyes today. The board has officially ratified your appointment, Cromwell said. The stock is up 4% in after-hours trading. The market likes a redemption story. And Lydia's lawyers are pleading for a deal. They're offering to surrender all claims to the estate in exchange for a lighter sentence recommendation. Take the deal, Alice said instantly. I don't want her in prison for the rest of her life. I want her to live a long, long time. I want her to live in a small apartment on a fixed income, watching me run the company she tried to steal. That's a better punishment. Cromwell nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Arthur was right. You are ruthless when you need to be. He reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. It wasn't sealed with the wax stamp of his law firm. It was taped shut with simple Scotch tape, yellowed with age. This is the last of it, Cromwell said. Arthur gave me 3 briefcases and this envelope. He made me swear on my reputation that I would not give this to you until the war was won. Until you were safe. Alice took the envelope. It felt heavy, solid. What is it? More bank accounts? Another secret trust? No, Cromwell said, standing up. This is the only thing he actually cared about. The rest, the money, the buildings, that was just the game. This was his life. Cromwell placed a hand on her shoulder. You should go to Lake George, Alice. Tonight. The return. The drive up to the Adirondacks took 4 hours. Alice drove the rental car herself, leaving her security detail behind. She needed the silence. As she merged onto the dark highway, the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the looming shadows of the mountains. She was heading to the fishing shack. That's what her mother used to call it. It was a cabin on the edge of Lake George that Arthur had bought before he made his first billion. It was the only property Lydia had never touched. Lydia hated it. She called it dirty and primitive. She refused to set foot in it. So, for the last decade, it had sat empty. Alice turned off the paved road onto the gravel track. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the tall pines that lined the driveway. And then, there it was. The cabin was smaller than she remembered. The wood siding was grey and weathered, the porch sagging slightly under the weight of years of unchecked snow. It looked lonely. Alice grabbed the envelope and stepped out into the crisp, cold mountain air. She could hear the water of the lake lapping gently against the shore. She walked up the creaking steps and pulled out the key from the envelope. It was an old brass key, cold to the touch. It fit the lock perfectly. Click. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her instantly, a mix of cedar, old wool, and dust. But underneath that, the faint, lingering scent of her father's pipe tobacco. It was a smell she hadn't smelled in 12 years. It brought tears to her eyes instantly. She flipped the switch. Nothing happened. The power had been cut years ago. She used her phone's flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. It was exactly as they had left it. There was the Monopoly board on the coffee table, the game unfinished. There was her mother's old cardigan draped over the rocking chair. It was a time capsule, frozen in the year 2010. She opened the note inside the envelope. Her father's handwriting was shaky, written perhaps weeks before he died. My dearest Bean, if you are reading this, you've beaten them. I never doubted you would. But winning comes with a cost. You feel hardened. You feel like you had to kill a part of yourself to survive them. I need you to know that you didn't. Go to the master bedroom. Look under the loose floorboard in the closet, the one where we used to hide the Christmas presents. You will find the truth there. Alice walked to the bedroom. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She knelt in the closet, pushing aside old fishing boots. She found the loose board and pried it up with her fingernails. Resting in the dusty crawl space was a large, battered metal lockbox. She pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the floor. It wasn't locked. She lifted the lid. Alice gasped. It wasn't money. It wasn't gold. It was her. The box was filled with hundreds of letters. She picked one up. It was unopened. The postmark was from Brooklyn, dated 7 years ago. To Arthur Vance. From Alice Vance. He never got them, she whispered, a fresh wave of grief hitting her. Lydia intercepted them. But then she looked closer. The seal was broken. It had been opened, and then resealed with tape. She pulled out another, and another. Every birthday card, every Christmas card, every angry letter she had written begging him to see the truth. He had them all, and underneath the letters were photographs. Alice frowned. These weren't family photos. These were photos taken from a distance. There was a photo of her waiting for the bus in the rain in Queens, a photo of her graduating from community college, taken from the back of the auditorium, a photo of her wiping tables at Shelley's diner. There was a note clipped to the stack. I didn't abandon you, Alice. I couldn't be with you. Lydia threatened to frame you for corporate espionage if I contacted you. She had fabricated evidence. She held a gun to your head, and the only way to keep her from pulling the trigger was for me to play dead, to let her think she had won. But I was always there. I hired a private detail to watch over you every day for 12 years. I saw you struggle and it broke my heart. I wanted to send money. I wanted to help. But I knew if I did, she would find out, and she would destroy you. I had to let the fire of the world forge you into steel, because I knew one day you would have to fight her, and you needed to be stronger than me. Alice sobbed, a guttural, raw sound that echoed in the empty cabin. He hadn't ignored her. He had been watching. He had been protecting her from the shadows the entire time. The private investigator Cromwell mentioned wasn't just investigating Lydia. He was Alice's guardian angel. At the very bottom of the box was a USB drive labeled, "For the End." Alice scrambled up. She remembered seeing an old laptop in her father's fishing bag in the corner. She prayed it still had charge, or at least that the power cord was there. She found the cord, plugged it into a dusty outlet that miraculously still worked. Cromwell must have had the power turned back on, and booted it up. She inserted the drive. A video file appeared. She clicked play. Arthur Vance filled the screen. He was sitting in this very room, in the rocking chair. He looked frail, his skin grey, but his eyes were sharp. "Hi, Bean." Arthur's voice filled the room, raspy but warm. Alice touched the screen, tracing his face. "If you're watching this, I'm gone," Arthur said. "And you are the CEO of Vance Global. I'm sorry I left you that mess. But listen to me closely." He leaned into the camera. "The company, the money, the buildings, it's all just noise, Alice. I spent my life building a tower to the sky, and I died lonely in a penthouse. You have a chance to do something I couldn't. You lived in the real world. You know what it costs to buy a quart of milk. You know what it feels like to be invisible." Arthur coughed, taking a moment to breathe. "Don't become me, Alice. Don't let the money turn you into a statue. Use the power to help the people I ignored. That is your inheritance, not the trust fund. But the perspective. You are the bridge between the high rise and the street. That is why I chose you. Not because you're my blood, but because you are decent." He smiled, a sad, sweet smile. "I love you, Bean. I loved you every day I couldn't say it. Now go turn off this computer. Go out to the dock, watch the sunrise, and breathe. You're free." The screen went black. Alice sat there for a long time. The silence of the cabin wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. She stood up. She walked out the back door, down the rotting wooden steps to the dock. The storm had passed. The sky to the east was turning a bruised purple, the first hint of dawn bleeding into the night. The lake was a sheet of black glass, reflecting the dying stars. Alice took a deep breath. The air tasted of pine and freedom. She took her phone out of her pocket. She had 50 missed calls, reporters, board members, lawyers. She looked at the screen. Then she wound her arm back and threw the phone as hard as she could. It skipped once, twice, 3 times across the water before sinking into the depths of Lake George. Alice Vance stood on the dock and watched the sun come up. She wasn't thinking about the stock price. She wasn't thinking about Julian or Lydia. She was thinking about the cherry pie at Shelley's. She was thinking about the pension fund she was going to restore on Monday morning. She was thinking that, for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered to the rising sun. She turned around and walked back into the cabin, ready to begin. What a journey. From the courtroom floor to the quiet of the cabin, Alice Vance didn't just reclaim her inheritance, she reclaimed her humanity. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. What is the true cost of success? Arthur Vance paid for his empire with his happiness, but Alice might just be the one to balance the scales. If this story moved you, if you felt that satisfaction when Julian got what he deserved, or that tear in your eye when Alice found the letters, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more of these stories to life. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Next week, we have a story about a janitor who discovers a secret code in a university chalkboard that changes physics forever. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, listening, and remember, the truth always leaves a trail. See you next time.